And our next speaker is Zack Schildhorn. Zack's the founder of a company called Series Z, which is a boutique pitch firm to help people give better talks and better pitches as investors, which is another big KV theme, is storytelling. Before that, he spent 15 years as an operator and investor at Lux Capital. We're actually on a board together, and a fun fact is he's a lifelong reef aquarist, and prior to Lux, he served as an expedition photographer on the Colorado Plateau. So please welcome Zack.
Thanks, Samir. It's really an honor to be here, and I'm excited to share with you today a little bit about what I'm working on and some of the lessons I've learned in my career. So as Samir mentioned, I'm a pitch consultant, and I don't think most people know what that means because I haven't met many other people that do what I do. So I like to think of what I do as helping entrepreneurs, and primarily very technical entrepreneurs, really refine their story, their narrative for investors, and then bring it to life creatively and visually in the form of a deck. So it's a combination of that strategic narrative and creative visual components. Today I'm mostly going to focus on the narrative piece, and tomorrow going to give a more detailed workshop on pitch decks. Over the course of my career, I've been extremely lucky to work with some really exciting companies in very diverse technical domains, ranging from hardware and robotics, surgical robotics, biomedical devices, biotherapeutics, energy, and hardware, helping companies raise hundreds of millions of dollars. But prior to that, I, as Samir mentioned, spent 15 years as an investor and operator at a firm called Lux Capital, which also focuses on frontier technologies. And I helped Lux tell its story for its investors, its LPs, and also worked with many Lux companies. And over that time at Lux, I saw lots of pitches, and most of them were not very good. And this was something that baffled me, because I'm sitting here realizing that millions of dollars are often on the line in these meetings based on the first impression that you as entrepreneurs are trying to make. And time and time and time again, you had brilliant people with really good ideas and powerful technology fail to make that connection. And it was frustrating to me because at times there'd be entrepreneurs that I really wanted to work with, and I knew that their pitch wasn't good enough to bring to my partnership. And I found myself gravitating towards helping these entrepreneurs, helping companies in our portfolio. And I kept asking myself, why is this such a hard problem? And I have a lot of empathy for your role as entrepreneurs, because to develop a good pitch is hard. You have to synthesize a lot of different skills and information in a really condensed, refined package that's effectively a performance that you're giving every time you walk into a pitch meeting. Some of those, of course, are the fundamental nature of what you're doing, the technology, your business knowledge, your strategy, your competitive advantage. Those are things you're usually pretty good at. You need to invest time to have a good pitch, and that's something you're often very short on. And I have empathy for that. You've got to hire people, run a company, run around to a million meetings. It's often easy to defer or delay the time you know you should be investing and working on your pitch. And so that's hard. There's a creativity piece to iterate and come up with new ideas on how to communicate. Some people have, some people struggle with, and also how to visualize ideas. And then I think one of the most important is getting an outside or investor perspective, particularly when you're trying to fundraise. And this is hard. And this is hard for a few reasons. One, I think investors are readily willing to give feedback, but if you've been through this process, you've probably experienced that that feedback is wildly divergent, and it's hard to understand what's the good feedback and what's not. Number two is I think investors are inherently very good critics. They know a good pitch when they see one, and they know to give feedback and can give lots of feedback when it's not good. But they're not necessarily good creators, and there's a big difference. An entrepreneur recently put it to me where it would be like if you took the great film critic Roger Ebert and put him behind the camera. the result would probably be awful. Once a film is made, he can give you the best feedback in the world, but it's a very different role. And investors are often much more critics than creators, even if you're lucky enough to have one that wants to work with you. And then the final thing is, I think there's often a somewhat fraught or tensioned relationship between founders and investors, because there's always this inherent power dynamic where an investor in the back of your mind, or you're worried about in the back of their mind, is always thinking, does this person think I'm good enough to keep being the CEO? Are they going to invest in the next round? So having that vulnerability to be totally open and the creative process of developing your pitch can be really hard with an investor. So one of the things I hope to bring to you today is really that investor perspective based on my experience in that role on the other side of the table. And the first thing is really appreciating the importance of your pitch, and then finally we'll go through some examples and some advice. And again, we only have 20 minutes. This is a deep topic. Some of this will be obvious to you. Some of it will be high level. Hopefully, a few things connect with you. But first, I just want to re-emphasize for you the importance of your pitch. And I'm going to try to make it quantitative for you, because I know a lot of you have technical backgrounds and are engineering oriented. I was in a meeting with Xander Lurie. Xander is the CEO of SurveyMonkey, now called Momentive, on the board of GoPro. Great guy, respected Silicon Valley CEO, been in the Valley for a while. And he was asked the question, which is, how do you define your job, the role of a CEO? And this is the list he came up with. Now, please don't take offense to the simplification of your job. I know I have incredible, incredible respect for the work that you do. I thought this was a good framework. If you don't like it, all blame to Xander, not to me. So if you look at these things, though, it's develop your strategy, raise money to pursue it, build a team to execute, communicate it, hold people accountable. 3 out of 5 of those, 60%, require you to be really effective in communicating what you do, why you do it, and making people care. So I think you can be a lot better at your job, not just in fundraising, which most people correlate with pitching, but in recruiting, in striking partnerships, in winning customers. A pitch is how you make people care about what you're doing. It is the first and often the last impression that you will make. And I think qualitatively, there's something kind of magic about a good pitch that lets you, in some ways, create your own luck in the world. Because even if you don't get that immediate conversion you're hoping for, like the next pitch meeting, in front of a partnership, or a yes to a candidate, that person, if you have a good pitch, is more likely to remember you. They're more likely to keep that idea in the back of their mind, and the next time that they're in a meeting with someone and something similar comes up, they're more likely to make that connection and either make an introduction or mention your name or your company. And so I think a good pitch is really kind of this hack for spreading ideas in the world and hopefully bringing some good luck your way. So onto the investor mindset. I hate to break it to you, but investors, despite the high regard we hold them in, are just like everybody else. They are very emotional decision makers. You heard this today. I feel like it's a common theme for the day, that decisions are often made in the gut and rationalized with the mind. And this is very true, and I've watched it happen. I've been in the room when people have made multi-million-dollar decisions primarily based on a feeling they got, which is kind of insane. It's like, wow, like these huge decisions are getting made every day, and not just in investor context, but all sorts of contexts based on how people feel in a meeting. Fear is, of course, a very powerful emotion, and I think we all just lived through an incredible experience where we watched how fear impacted decision-making and almost caused the collapse of a global banking system. That was a horrifying few days that we all lived through. Of course, you've all heard of FOMO, a very powerful social emotion of not wanting to be left behind when you think people are headed towards something good. You may not have heard of this one. And I think this is actually really true for investors too. It is often very difficult for investors to make a contrarian bet because they are worried that they might look foolish in front of their peers or their partners. I actually think you are all extremely lucky to have an investor like Khosla that has demonstrated time and time again they are willing to make bets on far out big ideas and stick with you. But this just reinforces the point that it is incredibly important to make your idea approachable and understandable to every investor. Of course, it's not just fear. Greed plays a big role. Most investors are, of course, motivated by making money, but all sorts of other emotions, trust and likability, passion for an area, enthusiasm or interest. Quick example from one of your peers. I'm friendly with Celine from Loyal, which is a really cool company focused on longevity and starting with dogs. The thesis goes that dogs live in similar environments to us and also have a much shorter lifespan, so you can run trials in shorter time period. There's a commercial market that exists. And when I was preparing this talk, I had an idea and a question, and I called Celine, and I didn't know the answer. And I was like, Celine, out of curiosity, how many of your investors are dog owners? And she's like, oh, 100%. Nobody else got it. And that, to me, was a really cool insight and example that just speaks to this point, because it's not like the logic of that pitch changed. It's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. I'm a dog owner. But it seemed that the only people who could really emote and connect with that were those who had companion animals and could relate to that emotional attachment and how much they'd be willing to pay personally. You could present data all day long on how much money people spend on their pets, but it didn't matter unless you were a pet owner. Those were the only people that got it. So principle number one, appeal to emotion. And we're going to talk a little bit about one tactic to do that. Investors also have very short attention spans. You all know this. I get it. You've got 15 board meetings. You've got a lot of pitches to go through. You've got a private island to purchase. Just kidding. Investors are busy. Everybody's busy. Everybody has short attention spans. We're all distracted by devices all day long. So you have to be able to capture and hold attention. And you have to be able to do that early, because if in the first minute or two of your pitch you've lost them, you're done. So this is a honed skill that we'll talk about as well. And then the next point is, I think, maybe one of the most critical. And this is understanding really what investors are buying. It's so easy to get caught up in trying to express what you are doing, what your technology is, what your product is, what your business model is going to be, and forget for a second why investors are investing with you. It's one of the most fundamental things. Investors don't buy any of these things. They are buying equity in your company. And buying equity is a statement which says, I believe that by buying something today, it can be worth more in the future. It's a stake in your company that they think will be more valuable over time. And so in order to get them to believe that, you have to sell your vision. You are selling the future. And this is something that is so often overlooked and forgotten in the minutia of trying to explain everything that you're doing, that you fail to just return to this most fundamental point, which is, here's what we're building towards. Here is what success looks like. If we're right, this could happen. So it's so important to talk about your vision, what you want to become. And one more point about investors, and one thing they definitely don't buy, is bullshit. I think investors have very sensitive detectors for this. They've been exposed to a lot of different kinds of people and are very quick to tease out honesty from fabrication. And I think this means two things. Number one, it means you have to be authentic in how you respond to questions. If you don't know the answer to something, that's okay. But make sure that you are open and honest in why you don't know it, how you're going to resolve it. Don't make anything up. And also be authentic to yourself when you're developing your pitch. If you're somebody who is really nerdy, lean into that. That's cool. That's okay. If you're someone who's really serious and intense, that's okay too. If you're someone who's funny, make a joke, that's okay. But you have to find something that feels very natural for you, otherwise it will forever feel unnatural. So you need to be authentic to yourself, and you need to be also honest. And I think this is just one of the most fundamental things of any relationship and building trust, and authenticity and honesty go a long way there. So, how do you implement some of this stuff? First, a common mistake that I think a lot of people make. When they think about developing their pitch, they immediately fire up their presentation software, Keynote, PowerPoint, whatever it is, and start making slides. I think it is a huge mistake. Slides have a ton of inertia. I find they have a tendency to stick around even if they're not good. You may have experienced this where you're still working with slides that you developed from your seed round or years ago that haven't really changed. And you kind of get stuck with them, and people often end up developing their pitch in service of their slides where they just speak to their slides, which is the exact opposite of, I think, what a deck is meant to do. And tomorrow I'm going to do a whole workshop on decks where we're going to go deep and share lots of ideas for how to develop decks. But they are really in service of your pitch. Your deck is meant to amplify the words that you are saying. It appeals to a totally different part of the brain, the visual part of the brain, whereas your words connect with a much more emotional and narrative center. And so I really think it's important to start with words. Some of the most effective pitches don't have a single slide. It's just people standing up in a room and telling their story. So start with your words. This can be a bulleted list. It can be sticky notes of ideas, but really try to hone in on your story and how you can express it in a concise way that starts to resonate with people. So if you want to get someone's attention, you have to have a unique point of view. And here I'm going to shift to start sharing some examples that integrate some of these concepts. And I want you to pay attention to how that happens. This is from a nuclear energy company focused on fission, with the premise that the solution to our energy challenge is right here today. And if nuclear fission weren't burdened by some of its past perceptions, it would be hailed as a miracle. And they open their pitch with a pretty provocative statement, which I think is really enticing and interesting, which is making you challenge your assumptions about nuclear energy. It's like, wow, if fission were discovered last week, it would be the headline of every major publication. This would be a crazy breakthrough. This is how we're thinking about fusion right now, but fission is already here. It's this unlimited source of carbon-free, scalable energy that's been proven to be incredibly safe. Pay attention. Captures your attention. Here's another one, totally different field. I had met an entrepreneur who was really interested in this idea of lost and found and wanted to build a marketplace around lost and found. And he was inspired by time he had visited Japan, where he learned that the rate of recovery of items that were lost was extremely high, like shockingly high, like 80%. And it turns out there's this whole government incentive system there. And he's like, well, if that example exists, we should be able to build this in the US. And the way he opened his story and his pitch was pretty clever, I thought. He said, if you look at Craigslist, for every single one of these categories, a pretty large marketplace business had been built. Everyone except for this one, lost and found. And I thought this was really clever because it made you feel like he had uncovered this little secret, right, that only he knew. It was this unique point of view. And he also anchored you to the precedent of there's value to be created in this list of categories. Now, whether true or not, like, time would only tell, but I thought it was a clever opening. Here's one more, and this is more customer-driven than investor-driven, but I thought it was a really good example. How many of you have young children? Okay, I have a 5-year-old daughter and a daughter who's going to turn 3 this week. So I empathize with the role of running a company and having young kids. You are all unbelievable superheroes. How many of you have heard of the snoo or used the snoo? Oh, wow, that's a pretty high number. So if you know the snoo, for those who don't, this is a baby bassinet that costs more than an iPhone. It's $1,300, and you can only use it for 3 months. That's a pretty hard sell. Right? It's really expensive. You can only use it for 3 months. I want you to listen and pay attention to the founder, Dr. Harvey Karp. He's a pediatrician turned inventor, how he talks about this. Now, again, this is for customers, but listen to his unique point of view, and then listen to how he appeals to the emotion of his customer, which is, of course, young parents.
That's really what the happiest baby is all about, this idea that our babies are born 4 months too early, and they need lots of rocking and holding and shushing, which is fine all day long, but the question came, what do you do all night long? Because parents are exhausted, and that exhaustion is not trivial. It leads to depression and child abuse and unsafe sleeping practices and breastfeeding failure and medicine and obesity. You can't lose your baby weight because you're so sleep deprived. So we created Snoo and released it about 1.5 years ago, which is a bed that, it's not even a bed. It looks like a bed. It's a bed, a white noise machine. It's a safe fit swing. It's an hour or 2 of extra sleep. It's safety because the baby is swaddled and they can't roll to an unsafe position. But the biggest thing it is really your 24/7 caregiver.
I think it's a brilliant pitch. I don't know if you feel the same way, but it is miraculous how he catches himself. You hear him talking and he's like, it's a bed. And he's, no, wait, it is not a bed. This is a cure for exhaustion. It's a cure for a worried parent. It's a caregiver. It's really incredible. And his unique point of view, which he doesn't get into as much here, but I think is a great way to capture attention, is a thesis he has that our babies are born 3 months too early. There's this whole fourth trimester that exists. That's why they're so helpless when they're born, and it's a result of our evolutionary history. As our brains got too big, we couldn't fit out the birth canal, so we came out too early, and that's why we're so helpless as babies compared to most other species. So, unique point of view, appeals to emotion. I think it's really good. So, we talked about how to get attention, how to have a unique point of view. There are other ways to get attention. This is one tactic, but I think it's really important because investors are looking for unique companies. They don't want you to be generic. They want a company that stands out, that people will pay attention to. Okay, so now on to emotion. How do you elicit emotion? I think the most convincing and powerful way to elicit emotion is the most time-tested, which is through story. There's something about stories that is really uniquely human. They're like viruses of the mind. They're how we communicate ideas and coordinate action. They're the root of our most enduring institutions, like religion, and the basis for some of our greatest accomplishments. And if you don't believe me that this is something that's like hardwired in us, just think for a second that even when your body goes to sleep, your mind stays up all night just telling itself stories. So I have one more example for you, and it's 2 minutes. I think it's a very good pitch, and I want you to pay attention. This is Palmer Luckey. He's the founder of Oculus, which sold to Facebook, and now a company called Anduril, which is in the defense tech space. I think he's a very effective pitchman, and I want you to pay attention to how he incorporates story. There are a lot of ways to do it. Pay attention to how he incorporates story, and hits on some of those points we spoke about. So communicating his vision, appealing to emotion, capturing attention. And I'm going to break it down for you afterwards so you can see how I thought about it. But just pay attention, 2 minutes.
Hi everyone, I'm Palmer Luckey, the founder of Anduril Industries. When I was young, I imagined, as many Americans probably do, that there was some secret government silo of advanced weapons that would save us if war ever broke out. We'd probably never have to use it, of course. The American military was unquestionably the world's greatest. No nation would ever seriously challenge our strategic interests. But were some crazy foreign leader to decide to invade one of our allies, or worse, the United States itself, we'd fire up those directed energy weapons, engulf the enemy in a stasis field, and win the war without firing a shot. Until one day I realized that wasn't true. The Department of Defense used to own all the technology it needed to credibly deter, and if necessary, win the next great war. But the same is not true today. Once upon a time, the armed services of the United States, United Kingdom, and our partners across the world were envied for their science fiction, technology, and prowess. But today, they're equipped with tools that are decades behind what you or I use every single day as consumers. We realized that the defense industry had grown stale. It needed new technology, a new business model, and new science and engineering talent. So we founded Anduril in 2017 with a mission to transform the defense capabilities of the United States and our allies around the world with advanced technology. We saw software advances in fields like artificial intelligence, secure networking, sensor fusion, and more transform our lives as consumers, but fail to make their way to the men and women in uniform. Meanwhile, our strategic competitors like China and Russia were doubling down on these very same technologies, hoping to win an asymmetric advantage over allied democracies. Anduril is a defense products company. We use private capital to take on the cost of research and development of the right things before selling to the United States government and our partners. We try to understand a problem or operational need, design products to solve that mission. That means that we're taking on the risk, not the government, not the taxpayer. And the result of that is that we're able to iterate and innovate far faster than legacy primes and traditional government contract timelines, and at the same time, save government and taxpayers money. Our goal is to become the next major defense prime and save the taxpayer hundreds of billions of dollars a year by making tens of billions of dollars a year.
So I don't know about you, but I thought that was a very good pitch. And when you break it down, it's really interesting because the first thing you can appreciate is that in that 2 minutes, the entire first minute, the first half, even more, I think it's like a minute, 15 seconds, is him telling a story that starts with when I was young. He tells his story about what he believed. There's like this authentic nerd moment when he talks about directed energy weapons and stasis fields. You can tell he's like a science fiction nerd, and he leans into that. He certainly captures attention with his Hawaiian shirt and facial hair. Not saying you need to do that, but that's one way to capture attention. He reveals this surprising point of view that most people might not be aware of, that perhaps the American military has fallen behind our strategic adversaries. He covers vision twice. When he first introduces the idea of Anduril, he talks about wanting to reinvigorate the American defense complex with advanced technology. And then at the end, again, he reiterates this goal to become the next great defense prime. He appeals to emotion several times. He has this innate fear that he appeals to that, oh my gosh, like maybe our safety is at risk if our strategic adversaries have greater technique or capabilities than us, and certainly patriotism of wanting to have a strong defense as a nation. And then, of course, at the end, an appeal to greed when he talks about this idea of making lots of money by saving people money. So a good pitch. Now, if you think that he's just naturally amazing at this and this was off the cuff, you are very wrong. This is a cultivated, practiced performance that he has been perfecting since starting this company. And I think the key lesson, and if I can give you anything to take away from today, it's that if you want to be really good at this, you do have to invest the time in it. It's a skill set, and it's something that needs to be honed and refined just like any other skill set. And so if you want to get good, you have to practice. You have to iterate. You have to test all the time what's working and what's not. You have to get so comfortable with your story and your pitch that you can do it at a moment's notice without a single slide, and you can pay attention not to what you're saying, which is so often the case. We're so focused on all the things we want to say and get out that we can't even pay attention to how people are reacting to what we're saying. When you get to the point that your pitch is really good, you will know it so well that you will be able to see what your audience is reacting to. And when you see that, you will know that you're doing the right thing. And so it's this process of practice and iteration and testing ideas that helps you get really good. But you can do it. I've seen people go from not good at all to very good. It just takes time and iteration and story. So if I can leave you with two things, it's worth an investment of your time to get good at this and figure out how to incorporate your story into your pitch. Thank you. I think I have time for a few questions. Yeah.
Why don't we take a few questions? Hands. Question here. Right here. No. Oh, sorry. I thought
No
you raised
questions.
Yes.
How would you best balance
Hold on. Wait for the mic.
being succinct in your pitch? How would you best balance demonstrating that early product market fit and traction that investors are looking for with then your eye on the vision of what it can be?
It's a good question, and I think it depends on the context, of course, of what you're selling, what your story is. If you do have traction, it's always good to lead with that. You don't want to bury the lead, and it depends what works for you. But I think you want to position that traction as a stepping stone on the journey of where you're headed. So while it's important to lead with that, look, we've got 10,000 stars on GitHub, or we have already landed our first 1,000 paying customers in this short period of time. That's amazing, and if you have that, that'll work really well for you. But I think it's also really important to either lead or follow that with, if we're really right in what we believe, like this is just the start. Like what our vision is to become the next great X, or we think, if we're really successful, this will appeal to millions of customers, not just our first 1,000. So making sure that the investor knows that you have your eye on a larger prize. I hope that's helpful, but it's very context dependent.
Here and then right here. Go ahead.
How do you think about positioning and telling a story in terms of what you are versus what you are not, particularly if you're going up against like a very entrenched industry like big pharma? Do you have a point of view on what is more successful, like leading into sort of your strengths versus somebody else's weaknesses?
Just to make sure I understand your question, are you saying that if you're finding you're building something that oftentimes people confuse or conflate with something that you're not? you want to make, like how to position that.
Or if you think that one of your biggest strengths is that you are not something else, i.e., like you're going up, there's a very good understanding of the entrenched solution, and you need to sort of re-educate people on the flaws of that versus like here's our core product offering and strength.
Yeah, I think that can be a very powerful approach. It doesn't mean that you still don't have to communicate like what you aspire to become, but I think by identifying something that is a unique perspective that can really stand out. Like if you have a unique point of view about a particular industry that somebody hasn't heard before, where you're challenging their mental framework of the world, that's a really good way to capture somebody's attention. So I think that can work if you really lean into it and demonstrate real sophistication and kind of looking at all angles of it.
Question over there.
So I have a question like that, and I think it's just capturing the attention in that first word or slide. But I imagine many of the CEOs in this room probably have a similar challenge that I've had, which is I'm kind of sandwiched between very technical co-founders who do think it's all about the technology. Mm-hmm. Over time, I can get them to pull away from that. But then you go in to talk to investors who always say, skip to slide 6, right? I don't need your story. Just tell me about the technology. And I'm just, you know, that's a tension that I imagine might be fairly common, but how do you actually get people to listen to the story in the less than goldfish span, I guess, when you're in there?
It depends, right? There can be like a preamble even to your pitch that incorporates some of that story, which is before you even. I find there's this tension with slides, right? The second you throw up slides, like people want you to just start scrolling through the deck. And so sometimes what I've seen people do is before they even bring anything up, it starts as a conversation, and that's their moment to tell their story and how they got to what they are before they bring something up. Because the second you put something on a screen, like that's the moment where their attention just goes right there, you know. And so. You can weave that in if you think it's effective and valuable, where you start communicating kind of background or some interesting anecdotes prior to even bringing up any slides. Yeah, and by the way, I'm around through tomorrow. I'm doing a workshop tomorrow. My favorite part of my job is getting to work with people like you. That's why I do what I do. I absolutely love it, like learning from you, helping. That's why I left an investment firm to do this. So don't be a stranger. Feel free to come up if we run out of time.
Question over there in the end. Yeah.
Zach, thanks a lot, and I'm actually coming to your workshop tomorrow too.
Oh, great.
So I'll probably dig in with more questions. I think we have the benefit of Khosla being our investor, and they believe in crazy galactic bets. But going back to something you said at the beginning of your presentation, CEOs and founders are inherently delusional and irrational and unreasonable, and they believe in crazy visionary things, and investors are very skilled at calling out bullshit. What is the fine balance between selling an audacious vision without it being presented as unfeasible to investors?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, and you can be very authentic in what you aspire to be without claiming certainty that you will become that, right? So it is very fair to say, if we're successful, like I think we have a chance to become, you can approach that audacity with humility in a way that feels believable, as opposed to having, crazy bravado certainty. I think that there's this phenotype of the entrepreneur, which I think is really poor, that's like this crazy bravado, I'm gonna change the world, I'm gonna do everything. And I think that's kind of the opposite of what you want to portray. If you want to be perceived as really authentic, you can still come across as extremely driven and visionary while also being humble about the things that you haven't accomplished yet. Those aren't incompatible. Those things can exist together. And so I think there's a way to weave in what you hope to do or what you believe you can do, and incorporating the evidence to date that supports that, or the evidence in the market that supports the need for a solution, without being overconfident or coming across like a bullshitter that you're just going to do this crazy thing.
Thanks, Zach.
Thank you so much.
We'll finish up with one last comment on presentations. I always tell people, don't use the same pitch for every investor. Research the investor, what have they invested in recently and why, and what appeals to them. Ask people they've invested in. and you can really tailor the pitch to the investor, not the same pitch you have. So different people like different messages.